The scorching Afghan sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky outpost as Sarah Chen adjusted her position behind the sandbags. The 24-year-old combat medic had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Ranger for 8 months, but today felt different. The Taliban had been unusually quiet for 3 days, and everyone knew that silence in this part of Helmand Province meant trouble was brewing. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez crawled up beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. "Chen, we've got movement in the valley. Intel suggests a major push coming our way." He handed her his binoculars, pointing toward the distant ridgeline where heat waves danced like ghosts above the desert floor. Sarah peered through the lenses, scanning the terrain she had memorized during countless hours of guard duty. Her father had taught her to hunt in the mountains of Colorado when she was just 12 years old. Those long weekends tracking elk and deer had given her an eye for spotting movement that most people would miss. She noticed something the others hadn't seen yet. "Sergeant, there's definitely something out there. I count at least 15 positions, maybe 20. They're using the old irrigation ditches for cover." Her voice was steady, professional. She had learned early in her deployment that panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. Rodriguez took back the binoculars and studied the area she had indicated. After a few minutes, he nodded grimly. "Good eye, Chen. I'm calling it in." The radio crackled to life as Rodriguez contacted the command post. Within minutes, 2 Marine snipers, Corporal James Mitchell and Lance Corporal Danny Torres, arrived at their position. Both men were experienced marksmen with multiple deployments under their belts. They set up their M40A5 sniper rifles with practiced efficiency. "We'll take care of this," Mitchell said confidently, adjusting his scope. "Torres and I have been working together for 2 years. We know these distances." Sarah watched as the 2 snipers settled into their firing positions. She had tremendous respect for their skills, but something nagged at her. The wind was picking up, creating dust devils in the valley below. The heat shimmer was getting worse as the day progressed, making accurate range estimation nearly impossible through conventional scopes. Mitchell fired first. The shot echoed across the valley, but Sarah could see through her binoculars that it had fallen short. Torres adjusted and took his shot. This one went wide to the left. The enemy positions immediately came alive with return fire, muzzle flashes winking from the ditches like deadly fireflies. "They know we're here now," Rodriguez muttered, ducking as bullets snapped overhead. "We need to neutralize those positions before they call in reinforcements." Mitchell and Torres continued firing, their shots disciplined and carefully aimed. But the combination of extreme distance, heat shimmer, and unpredictable wind was making accurate shooting nearly impossible. After 10 minutes of sustained fire, they had managed to suppress some of the enemy positions, but hadn't eliminated the threat. "This isn't working," Torres said, frustration evident in his voice. "The conditions are too difficult. We need to call for air support." Sarah had been quietly observing the engagement, noting the wind patterns and studying the way the heat affected the trajectory of the bullets. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sarah, shooting isn't just about pulling the trigger. You have to read the environment, become part of it, feel the wind, understand the light, respect the distance." "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said quietly, "mind if I use your rifle?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Rodriguez looked at her with surprise. "Chen, you're a medic. This is sniper work." "I know, Sergeant, but I've been watching this engagement, and I think I understand what's happening with the wind patterns. Those irrigation ditches create their own microclimate. The shots are being affected by thermals rising from the concrete." Mitchell looked over at her skeptically. "No offense, Doc, but this is precision work. We're talking about 800-meter shots in difficult conditions." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand, Corporal, but my father taught me to hunt in similar conditions back home in Colorado. Mountain thermals, wind shear, long distances. I might be able to help." The radio crackled with an urgent message from the command post. "Ranger 6, this is base. We have drone surveillance showing additional enemy forces moving toward your position. Time is critical. Air support is 20 minutes out. Rodriguez made a quick decision. The conventional approach wasn't working, and they were running out of time. Torres, let Chen take a look through your scope. Maybe fresh eyes will see something we're missing. Torres reluctantly moved aside, allowing Sarah to position herself behind his rifle. She adjusted the scope and studied the target area carefully. The enemy fighters had become more aggressive, believing they had pinned down the American position. Through the scope, Sarah could see the subtle signs that the trained snipers had missed. The way dust moved differently over the irrigation ditches indicated a consistent crosswind from the northwest. The heat shimmer was creating a visual distortion, but she could compensate for it by aiming slightly lower than the apparent target position. "I can see the problem," she said softly. "The thermals are creating an updraft that's pushing the bullets high, and there's a consistent crosswind of about 8 miles per hour from the northwest." Mitchell frowned. "How can you tell the wind speed without proper equipment?" Sarah smiled slightly, remembering countless hours in the Colorado mountains with her father. "Watch the dust patterns around the concrete structures. See how it swirls and settles? That's your wind indicator." She adjusted the scope settings, calculating for the environmental factors she had observed. Her breathing slowed as she settled into the familiar rhythm her father had taught her years ago. "There's something else. These aren't random Taliban fighters. Look at their positioning, their discipline. This is a coordinated attack." Rodriguez studied the enemy positions again. Sarah was right. The fighters were too well organized, too professional for a typical Taliban unit. "What are you thinking, Chen?" "High-value targets, probably foreign fighters or Taliban commanders. That's why they're being so aggressive. They think they can overrun our position before reinforcements arrive." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. More enemy fighters were appearing in the valley, and the volume of incoming fire was increasing. The small American position was in danger of being overwhelmed. "Sergeant," Sarah said, her eye still pressed to the scope, "I have a clean shot on what appears to be the leader. He's in the central position, directing the others. If I can take him out, it might disrupt their coordination." Rodriguez hesitated. Allowing a medic to engage in sniper operations was highly irregular, but conventional tactics weren't working, and they were running out of options. "Mitchell, Torres, what do you think?" Both snipers looked at Sarah with new respect. Her analysis of the environmental conditions had been accurate, and her tactical assessment of the enemy positions was sound. "Let her try," Mitchell said finally. "We're not hitting anything in these conditions anyway." Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself the way her father had taught her. She thought about all those mornings in the Colorado mountains, tracking elk through difficult terrain, learning to read the subtle signs that nature provided. This was different, but the fundamental skills were the same. "Target acquired," she whispered, settling the crosshairs on the enemy commander who was moving between positions, coordinating the attack. "Wind 8 miles per hour northwest, range approximately 820 meters. Adjusting for thermal updraft." The valley seemed to hold its breath as Sarah prepared to take the shot that would either change the course of the engagement or confirm that the situation was hopeless. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final adjustments, calculating for every variable that could affect the bullet's trajectory over the long distance to the target. Sarah's world narrowed to the small circle of view through the rifle scope. Everything her father had taught her about patience, breathing, and reading the environment crystallized in this moment. She could feel her heartbeat, slow and steady, counting the seconds between beats to time her shot perfectly. The enemy commander moved with confidence, clearly believing his forces had the advantage. He was directing his fighters with hand signals, positioning them for what appeared to be a final assault on the American position. Sarah tracked his movement, anticipating where he would stop next. "Breathe in, hold, release halfway," she whispered to herself, repeating her father's mantra. Let the rifle do the work. The shot broke clean and true. The bullet traveled across the 800 meters of hostile terrain in less than a second, cutting through the heat shimmer and crosswind with deadly precision. The enemy commander dropped instantly, his coordination of the attack ending abruptly. Holy shit, Torres breathed. Direct hit. 820 meters, first shot. But Sarah was already tracking to the next target. She had noticed something during her observation that the others had missed. The Taliban fighters weren't just randomly positioned. They had established overlapping fields of fire, creating a deadly crossfire zone that would have decimated any rescue force attempting to reach the American position. There, she said, adjusting her aim to a fighter with a machine gun who was setting up to provide covering fire for the others. He's the anchor for their left flank. The second shot was even more challenging. The target was partially concealed behind concrete debris, and the angle required her to thread the bullet through a gap barely 18 inches wide. Sarah calculated the trajectory, adjusted for the slight change in wind direction, and squeezed the trigger. Another hit. The machine gunner slumped forward over his weapon. Rodriguez was on the radio, providing real-time updates to the command post. Base, this is Ranger 6. We have multiple confirmed kills on enemy positions. The medic is... She's taking them out one by one. Mitchell and Torres watched in amazement as Sarah continued her methodical engagement of the enemy forces. Her shooting was unlike anything they had seen. Where they had been struggling with the environmental conditions, she seemed to read them intuitively, adjusting for factors they hadn't even considered. How did you learn to shoot like this? Mitchell asked during a brief pause as Sarah searched for her next target. My father was a competitive shooter before he became a hunting guide, she replied, not taking her eye from the scope. He taught me that shooting is more mental than physical. You have to become one with the environment. Understand how every factor affects the bullet's path. The enemy forces were beginning to realize that their positions were being systematically eliminated. Sarah could see confusion spreading through their ranks as their carefully planned attack fell apart. Without their commander to coordinate their movements, the individual fighters were making tactical errors, exposing themselves as they tried to reposition. Target, right flank, behind the overturned vehicle, Sarah called out, more for the benefit of the other Marines than because she needed to announce it. Her fourth shot took down a fighter who had been trying to flank their position. Torres shook his head in disbelief. 4 for 4 at 800 meters plus. In these conditions, that's impossible. Not impossible, Sarah said quietly. Just requires understanding the environment. Look at how the heat shimmer moves. It's not random. There's a pattern based on the underlying terrain and the concrete structures. She was right. The experienced snipers had been fighting the environmental conditions instead of working with them. Sarah's approach was fundamentally different. She read the heat shimmer like a weather map, used the wind patterns to her advantage, and calculated her shots based on the physics of the environment rather than just the distance to the target. The radio crackled with another transmission from the command post. Ranger 6, we're seeing significant disruption in enemy movements. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Air support is still 15 minutes out. Sarah had identified the key positions that were holding the enemy attack together. There was a spotter on the ridgeline who was directing fire, 2 more machine gun positions that were providing covering fire, and what appeared to be a secondary commander who was trying to rally the scattered fighters. Sergeant Rodriguez, I need you to create a distraction on the left side. Get them looking that way for about 30 seconds, Sarah said, tracking the spotter on the ridge. Rodriguez nodded and directed several Marines to lay down suppressing fire toward the left side of the enemy formation. As the Taliban fighters turned their attention to the new source of fire, Sarah took her most challenging shot yet. The spotter was nearly 900 meters away, positioned on higher ground with excellent concealment. The bullet had to travel uphill through varying air density, crosswind, and severe heat distortion. Sarah calculated the trajectory, added extra compensation for the uphill angle, and fired. The shot took nearly 2 seconds to reach its target, but it was perfect. The spotter tumbled from his concealed position, his valuable intelligence-gathering capability eliminated. 900 meters uphill, moving target, Torres said in amazement. That's sniper school instructor-level shooting. But Sarah was already moving to her next target. The secondary commander had realized that his forces were being picked apart by precision fire and was attempting to organize a retreat. Sarah couldn't allow him to escape with valuable intelligence about American positions and capabilities. The commander was smart, using concealment and constantly moving to avoid presenting a clear target. Sarah tracked his movement pattern, predicting where he would appear next. When he briefly exposed himself to signal his fighters, she was ready. Her 7th shot ended the enemy's ability to conduct an organized withdrawal. The remaining Taliban fighters were now in full retreat, abandoning their weapons and equipment as they fled across the valley. What had started as a coordinated attack by a superior force had been turned into a rout by the precision shooting of a combat medic who had learned her skills hunting elk in Colorado. "Base, this is Ranger 6, Rodriguez reported. "Enemy force is in full retreat. Multiple confirmed kills, no friendly casualties. The threat has been neutralized." Sarah finally lifted her head from the scope, blinking in the harsh sunlight. The engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Her hands were steady, her breathing normal. The adrenaline hadn't hit her yet. "How many?" Mitchell asked. Sarah thought for a moment, counting the shots she had taken. 7 confirmed kills, all at distances over 800 meters. Torres whistled low. 7 for 7, in combat conditions, with equipment you'd never used before. He paused, looking at her with new respect. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you shouldn't be a medic. You should be in sniper school." But Sarah shook her head. "I became a medic to save lives, not take them. This was necessary to protect our position and our Marines. But it's not what I want to do." Rodriguez nodded understanding. He had seen enough combat to know that sometimes good people had to do difficult things to protect their fellow soldiers. "Chen, what you did here today saved all our lives. That was a professional military unit, not typical Taliban fighters. They would have overrun us without air support." As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of helicopters began to echo across the valley. The air support was finally arriving, but the threat had already been eliminated by the most unlikely sniper any of them had ever seen. Sarah looked out across the valley where the enemy had been positioned. The engagement was over, but she knew this was just the beginning. Word of what had happened would spread quickly through the military chain of command. A combat medic who could outshoot trained snipers in extreme conditions was not something that would go unnoticed. She had no idea that within hours, her actions would come to the attention of people far above her pay grade, and that her life in the military was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. 3 days after the engagement, Sarah was summoned to the command post. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, was waiting for her along with several officers she didn't recognize. Their uniforms bore insignia she had only seen in military textbooks. "Hospital Corpsman Chen," Colonel Harrison began formally, "I want you to meet Major General Patricia Williams from Special Operations Command and Colonel David Chen from Marine Corps Scout Sniper School." Sarah stood at attention, confused about why such high-ranking officers would want to speak with her. The engagement 3 days ago had been thoroughly debriefed, and she had assumed the matter was closed. "Relax, Chen," General Williams said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "We're here because of your extraordinary performance during the recent enemy contact. 7 confirmed kills at extreme range, under adverse conditions, with unfamiliar equipment. That's not just impressive, it's unprecedented." Colonel Chen stepped forward, studying Sarah with professional interest. "I've reviewed the engagement reports, the ballistics analysis, and the testimony of the Marine snipers who witnessed your shooting. What you accomplished should have been impossible." Sarah remained silent, unsure how to respond. She had simply done what was necessary to protect her fellow Marines. "We've also done some research into your background," General Williams continued. "Your father, Thomas Chen, was a competitive shooter who represented the United States in international competitions before he became a hunting guide. You grew up learning precision shooting in some of the most challenging terrain in Colorado." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "My father taught me to hunt starting when I was 12 years old." Colonel Chen nodded. "That explains the natural ability, but not the tactical awareness you demonstrated. You read the enemy positions like a professional intelligence analyst. How did you know they weren't typical Taliban fighters?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Their positioning was too disciplined, sir. They had overlapping fields of fire, designated leadership positions, and coordinated movement patterns. It looked more like a military exercise than a typical insurgent attack." "Exactly right," General Williams confirmed. "Intelligence analysis after the engagement confirmed that you eliminated a cell of foreign fighters, including 2 high-value targets we had been tracking for months. Your actions prevented what would have been a major propaganda victory for enemy forces." The general paused, studying Sarah's reaction. "But that's not why we're here. We're here because of what happened next." Sarah looked confused. "Ma'am?" Colonel Chen opened a folder and spread several photographs on the table. They were satellite images of the valley where the engagement had taken place. "These were taken by a surveillance drone that was monitoring the area. After you eliminated the immediate threat, what did you do?" Sarah thought back to the events following the shooting. "I provided medical treatment to Lance Corporal Rodriguez, who had taken shrapnel from enemy fire. Then I helped evacuate the wounded from a helicopter that was shot down during the air support operation. Under enemy fire," General Williams added, "while the area was still contested, you left the relative safety of your position to render aid to wounded personnel from the downed aircraft." The photographs showed Sarah's movement across the open ground, carrying medical supplies and helping to evacuate casualties while sporadic enemy fire continued from the hills. What the officers didn't mention was that she had also provided covering fire for the evacuation, using the same precision shooting skills to suppress enemy positions that were threatening the rescue operation. "Corpsman Chen," Colonel Chen said, "in a single day you demonstrated the highest levels of both combat effectiveness and medical expertise. That combination is extremely rare." General Williams leaned forward. "We're here to offer you an opportunity. Special Operations Command is developing a new program for combat medics with advanced tactical skills. We need people who can operate independently in extreme conditions, providing both medical support and direct action capabilities when necessary." Sarah felt her world shifting. "Ma'am, I enlisted as a medic because I wanted to save lives, not take them." "I understand that," the general replied. "And that's exactly why you're the right person for this program. Someone who takes no pleasure in combat, but has the skills to excel at it when necessary. Someone whose primary motivation is protecting and saving others." Colonel Chen added, "This wouldn't be about becoming a sniper. It would be about becoming the best possible combat medic, with additional training that would allow you to protect your patients and your fellow service members in any situation." The offer was tempting, but Sarah had concerns. "What would this training involve?" General Williams smiled. "Advanced medical training, including surgical procedures under field conditions, special operations tactics, advanced marksmanship training, survival skills, languages. Essentially, you would become qualified to operate anywhere in the world under any conditions." "There's something else," Colonel Chen said. "Your father contacted us." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir?" "Word of your actions reached the civilian press. Your father saw the reports and reached out to Marine Corps headquarters. He wanted to make sure you were being properly recognized for your service." Colonel Chen paused. He also wanted to tell you how proud he is of you. Emotions that Sarah had been suppressing for 3 days suddenly threatened to overwhelm her. Her father had always been her hero, the person who taught her everything she knew about shooting and hunting. Knowing that he was proud of her meant more than any military decoration. He also said something that convinced us you were the right person for this program, General Williams continued. He said you had always been able to see things that others missed, that you had a natural understanding of how all the pieces fit together. Whether you were tracking an elk through difficult terrain or diagnosing a complex medical condition, you could see the whole picture. Sarah thought about her father's words. He had always encouraged her to use her abilities to help others, whether that meant providing medical care or using her shooting skills to put food on the table for families who needed it. If I accept this opportunity, what happens to my current assignment? You would finish your deployment with distinction, Colonel Chen replied. Then you would begin an intensive training program that would last approximately 18 months. After that, you would be assigned to special operations units where your unique combination of skills would be most valuable. General Williams stood up. Corpsman Chen, I want to be clear about something. What you did 3 days ago was extraordinary, but it was just the beginning. The military is changing, and we need people who can adapt and excel in complex situations. You've proven you have those qualities. Sarah thought about her fellow Marines, about the wounded soldiers she had treated, about the responsibility she felt to protect and serve others. The offer represented an opportunity to develop her skills and serve at the highest levels, but it also meant accepting that combat would be a regular part of her life. Ma'am, can I have some time to think about this? Of course. Take as long as you need, but I hope you'll consider that your unique abilities could save many lives in the future, both as a medic and as someone capable of protecting others when they can't protect themselves. After the officers left, Sarah walked out to the perimeter of the base and looked across the valley where the engagement had taken place. The irrigation ditches were empty now, and the heat shimmer danced peacefully in the afternoon sun. It was hard to believe that just 3 days ago, this had been a battlefield. She thought about her father's lessons, about the responsibility that came with her abilities, and about the Marines who depended on people like her to keep them safe. The choice before her wasn't really about whether to accept advanced training or continue as a regular combat medic. It was about how she could best use her skills to serve others. That evening, she called her father from the base communications center. His voice was filled with pride and concern when he heard about the opportunity she had been offered. Sarah, you've always been able to see the bigger picture, he told her. Trust your instincts. Whatever decision you make, I'll support you completely. 2 days later, Sarah submitted her application for the Special Operations Medical Program. She knew it would be the most challenging training she had ever undertaken, but she also knew it was the right choice. Her unique combination of skills could make a difference in saving lives and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. 6 months later, at the completion of her deployment, Sarah received the Navy Cross for her actions during the engagement. But more importantly to her, she also received commendations for the 17 wounded Marines she had treated during her tour, all of whom survived to return home to their families. As she prepared to leave Afghanistan for advanced training, Sarah looked back on the events that had changed her life. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. But more importantly, she had learned that true strength came from using those abilities in service of others. Her father had taught her to read the wind and calculate distance, but the military had taught her that the most important target was always the protection and preservation of human life. Whether that meant healing the wounded or eliminating threats to those under her protection, Sarah Chen had found her calling as someone who could see the whole picture and act decisively when it mattered most. The young woman who had asked to use a rifle had become someone who understood that true marksmanship wasn't about the precision of the shot, but about the wisdom to know when and why to take it.